Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into a fascinating moment in history, the privatization of Welsh Water in the early 1990s.
Yeah,
And you've shared the original prospectus for the public offering of shares in Welsh Water PLC, which is incredible.
it is. Yeah, it's a primary source.
Yeah,
It's not just numbers and legalese. It's like a story waiting to be uncovered.
exactly. And depending on why you're diving in with us today, maybe you're researching this trend globally or prepping for a meeting or just have an insatiable curiosity about how things work, this prospectus is a goldmine.
It is, yeah.
So, where do we even begin with something like this?
Well, it's crucial to remember that before 1989, water and sewage services in Wales were managed by a public entity called the Welsh Water Authority.
Okay.
Then the Water Act of 1989 changed everything, leading to the creation of Welsh Water PLC, a private company.
Right.
And this prospectus was essentially their way of introducing themselves to the world and especially to potential investors.
Okay, so it's like a grand debut, but for a company that manages something as essential as water.
Yeah.
And they weren't exactly a small operation.
No, not at all.
Were they?
The prospectus details the immense scale of Welsh Water, serving 3.1 million people, managing 91 reservoirs, treating 50% of the region's sewage, and even handling complex agreements like the Elan Valley bulk water supply to Severn-Trent.
Wow, that's a lot. The logistics alone must have been just mind-boggling, but the prospectus doesn't shy away from the challenges either, does it?
No, it's quite upfront about that. Serving sparsely populated areas means a vast network of pipes to maintain. They also had aging infrastructure and the ever tighter standards set by the EC Drinking Water Directive to contend with.
Right. And speaking of challenges, there's Miss K factor mentioned throughout the prospectus. It sounds a bit like something out of a science fiction novel.
Yeah.
Can you break that down for us?
So imagine this Welsh Water needs to invest heavily in modernization, like a whopping £1.75 billion over 10 years. The regulator, understanding the need for these improvements, allows them to increase charges above inflation to cover those costs.
Okay.
That little bit extra they're allowed to add, that's the K factor.
Okay, so it's like a balancing act between allowing the company to recoup its investment costs while ensuring that customers aren't unfairly burdened.
Exactly.
But what exactly were they investing in? Did they just throw money at random problems?
Well, actually, the prospectus is very specific about where that money was going. A huge chunk was earmarked for upgrading water treatment facilities,
Makes sense.
which makes sense given those stricter water quality standards we mentioned earlier.
Right.
They also plan to replace or reline a staggering 60% of the water mains.
Wow.
Think about all the leaks and potential disruptions they could avoid by tackling that.
Yeah. Okay, so it's starting to make a little more sense. So it's not just about building new things, it's about maintaining what they already have and making sure it's up to par.
Exactly. And then there's the often overlooked area of sewerage. They were addressing storm overflows to minimize environmental impact, upgrading treatment plants, and even improving those all-important sewer records.
Sewer records. Now, that's not something you hear about every day,
Right?
is it?
It might not be glamorous, but accurate records are crucial for managing such a complex system.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting. They were also implementing a cutting-edge business information system to enhance efficiency and customer service. This was pretty forward-thinking for the early 1990s.
So they were investing in technology as well. It sounds like they were trying to modernize every aspect of the business. But wait, the prospectus also mentions something about ventures beyond their core operations.
Yes, they were. They were branching out into engineering and environmental services through subsidiaries.
Okay.
They even planned to acquire a consulting engineering firm called Wallace Evans and Partners to expand their reach even further.
Wow.
And there's a curious mention of a joint venture in fish rearing.
Fish rearing, that seems a bit out of left field for a water company. Did those ventures succeed? It sounds like they were quite ambitious.
That's a question worth exploring further, isn't it? This prospectus is like a springboard for a whole new set of inquiries.
It is. It's like we've opened a door to this fascinating but complex world. But before we dive deeper into those ventures, there's one more aspect of the prospectus. We need to touch on national identity. This was a major economic shift for Wales, and there were clearly concerns about how that would impact their cultural identity.
Yes, there was a real fear of losing control to outside interests. So the prospectus highlights specific positions aimed at safeguarding Welsh national identity.
Okay.
One key safeguard was a clause in the company's Articles of Association that prevented any single entity from owning more than 15% of the voting share capital.
So they built in a mechanism to prevent any one investor from having too much sway.
Right?
It's fascinating to see how they tried to balance economic realities with cultural considerations.
Indeed. This prospectus is like a multi-layered puzzle, revealing new insights with every piece we examine.
I couldn't agree more, but we've only just scratched the surface. I'm particularly interested in how they plan to balance profit with their responsibility to the environment.
That's a crucial aspect, especially given the growing environmental awareness of the time. Let's delve into that next.
So it's clear that this prospectus was trying to walk this tightrope between appealing to investors and reassuring the public that their water was in safe hands.
Yeah.
So how did they plan to address the growing environmental concerns of the time?
Well, the prospectus tackles this head-on, highlighting their commitment to environmental responsibility alongside financial performance.
Okay.
It wasn't just lip service either. They specifically mentioned meeting that EC drinking water directive as a top priority,
Right.
which meant substantial investment in those upgraded water treatment facilities we discussed earlier.
Okay, so clean and safe drinking water was non-negotiable.
Right.
But what about the impact on the environment beyond just water quality?
They addressed that as well. Remember those leaky pipes they planned to replace?
Yeah.
Well, that wasn't just about efficiency and cost saving. It was about minimizing water loss,
Right.
which has a direct impact on the environment.
It's all connected, isn't it? Every decision has these ripple effects.
Absolutely. And those ripple effects extended to the sewage system, too. The prospectus details their plans to tackle storm overflows that can pollute rivers and coastal waters. They even specifically mentioned complying with the EC Bathing Water Directive, which shows they were thinking about the impact on recreational areas as well.
So they were acknowledging the broader ecosystem, not just the pipes and treatment plants themselves.
Yeah.
But if we're being honest, this prospectus is also full of very technical jargon, like these relaxations they mention in relation to water quality.
Ah, yes. It can get a bit dense in places, can't it?
It can.
Essentially, they're being upfront about the fact that meeting every single water quality standard across such a vast and diverse region would be incredibly difficult, even with significant investment.
Right.
So these relaxations were basically temporary exemptions from certain standards while they worked to make improvements.
So a bit of breathing room while they get things up to scratch.
Right.
But they weren't just asking for a free pass, were they?
Not at all. Alongside these relaxations, they also outlined concrete steps they'd take to address any areas where they weren't meeting the mark. These were called Section 20 undertakings, which are basically legally binding commitments to carry out specific remedial work within a certain time frame.
So a combination of transparency about the challenges and a clear plan to address them.
Yeah.
It sounds like they were trying to strike a balance between acknowledging the difficulties and reassuring people that they were taking things seriously.
Exactly. And that transparency extended to how they dealt with specific water quality issues.
Okay.
They identified parameters like color, turbidity, iron, and manganese where the water quality might fall short.
Uh-huh.
And they didn't just throw money at the problem. The prospectus details the specific types of remedial work they plan to do, like upgrading treatment processes and replacing problematic sections of the distribution system.
So a targeted evidence-based approach rather than a knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah.
That makes sense. But there's one thing that caught my eye, and honestly, it made me a little uneasy. They talk about sea and estuarial outfalls, which, if I understand correctly, are pipes that discharge treated or partially treated sewage into coastal waters.
Yeah, you're right to pick up on that. It's a sensitive issue, and the prospectus does acknowledge that discharges from some of these outfalls were contributing to bathing water quality issues.
That doesn't sound good.
It's certainly a point of contention even today. But it's important to remember that wastewater management is complex, and sometimes these outfalls are a necessary part of the system. The key is minimizing their impact.
Right.
And in their defense, the prospectus stresses their commitment to improving these outfalls, particularly in areas popular for swimming and recreation, so they could meet those EC Bathing Water Directive standards.
Okay, so back to that balancing act again, finding ways to manage wastewater effectively while minimizing the impact on the environment and public health.
Precisely. And it's worth noting that even when discussing cost-saving measures which would appeal to investors, they emphasize that these won't come at the expense of environmental protection.
Okay.
They were adamant about maintaining or even improving standards while becoming more efficient.
It sounds like they were trying to thread a very fine needle.
Yeah.
But did they actually succeed? Did this privatization actually lead to a healthier environment for whales?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And remember, this prospectus is a snapshot in time,
Right.
a glimpse into their intentions at the moment of privatization. To really understand the long-term impacts, we need to look beyond this document.
We need to see how these plans played out in the real world.
Exactly. What happened in the years that followed? Did Welsh Water live up to its promises? Did the regulatory framework work as intended?
Right.
These are the questions we need to grapple with if we want to truly understand the legacy of this privatization.
It's a reminder that documents like this are just the beginning of the story.
They are. And speaking of stories, this prospectus gives us a glimpse into the human side of this massive transition, the thousands of employees whose lives were about to change. Let's dive into that aspect next.
So we've talked about these grand plans and this Environment and Balancing Act, but let's not forget the people at the heart of this whole privatization.
Right.
This prospectus gives us a fascinating look at the workforce and the changes that they were facing.
Yeah, easy to get caught up in the big numbers and the financial details.
Right.
But behind it all were thousands of employees, engineers, scientists, customer service representatives, and folks out in the field maintaining the pipes and the treatment plants. This was their livelihood,
Their careers.
their
And
careers.
remember, this was a time of significant downsizing across a lot of industries.
Yeah,
Job security must have been a huge concern for Welsh Water employees.
absolutely. And the prospectus doesn't shy away from that. It acknowledges that workforce reductions had already taken place in the lead up to privatization as they focused on improving operational efficiency.
So while they were trying to reassure investors about the company's leaner and more efficient future,
Right.
they also had to address the very real impact on their employees. How did they navigate that?
Well, they highlight the importance of training, especially for management, to equip employees with the skills they would need in this new, more competitive environment.
Okay.
They also mentioned severance payments for those who were let go.
So it sounds like they were trying to offer some support
Yeah,
during this transition, even as they were making tough decisions about downsizing. But what about the unions? This was a major shift from a public entity with strong union representation to a private company. How did that dynamic play out?
that's a crucial point. The prospectus is very clear that national negotiating and procedural arrangements terminated with privatization.
Okay.
However, they also emphasize that existing conditions of employment would be carried over and that discussions with trade unions about future collective bargaining frameworks were underway.
So a recognition that unions would continue to play a role even in this new landscape. It sounds like they were trying to strike a balance between the realities of private ownership and the importance of employee representation.
It was a very delicate dance, and it wasn't just about managing the existing workforce. They're also thinking about the future.
Okay.
They established an employee share scheme as part of the public offering.
That's interesting. Why would they do that?
It was a way to incentivize employees and give them a sense of ownership in the newly privatized company. It was also a way to potentially soften the blow of privatization by offering a financial upside to those who might otherwise be apprehensive about the change.
Yeah, a smart move strategically speaking. It creates a shared interest in the company's success.
Exactly. And they also highlight the experience and expertise of the management team, many of whom had long careers in the water industry.
Okay.
They were trying to project an image of stability and competence, crucial for building trust with both investors and the public, especially in a time of such significant change.
So they were trying to reassure everyone that the company was in capable hands, even as it embarked on this uncharted territory.
Right.
It's remarkable how much this prospectus reveals not just about the financial and logistical aspects of privatization, but also about the social and human implications.
It really is. It's a reminder that these large-scale economic shifts have profound effects on individuals and communities. This prospectus gives us a glimpse into the hopes and anxieties of that time as Welsh Water navigated this transition from public to private ownership.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the financial mechanics of the K factor to the delicate balance between profitability and environmental responsibility, and now the human side of this complex story. What's the key takeaway for our listener today?
I think this prospectus, beyond its dry financial details, offers a valuable window into a pivotal moment, not just for Welsh Water, but for a global trend that was reshaping industries and economies.
Uh-huh.
It highlights this intricate dance between economic goals and public good, the challenges of modernizing infrastructure while safeguarding the environment, and the very human impact of these large-scale shifts.
It's a reminder that behind every balance sheet and every policy decision, there are people whose lives are affected.
Absolutely. And while the prospectus offers a snapshot of the plans and promises made at the time, it also raises crucial questions about the long-term consequences of this privatization. Did Welsh Water truly live up to its commitments? How did this shift impact the environment and the people of Wales in the years that followed?
Those are questions worth pondering, and we encourage our listeners to continue exploring this story.
The story of Welsh Water doesn't end with this prospectus.
Right.
It's a story that continues to unfold with implications for the economy, the environment, and the people of Wales.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the ripples of this historical event. Until next time, happy deep diving.